At least they're talking. No Oval Office made-for-TV drama as the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance joined the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio behind closed doors for a sit-down with the foreign ministers of Greenland and Denmark. We'll ask about the uptake and the renewed pressure by the Trump administration on Copenhagen to hand over that Arctic dependency. How intent is the U.S. on seizing Greenland? Even if it means the end of the Atlantic alliance that safeguarded Europe's defense since World War II, it's hard to see how NATO could survive coercive action against a faithful ally by its dominant member. Donald Trump stated his intentions on Inauguration Day nearly 1 year ago, yet the question still begs, why Greenland? Is it about securing maritime passages, untapped raw materials, muscle flexing, or simply the fun of keeping everyone guessing? As Denmark's prime minister says, though, it's not fun, it's serious. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking why Greenland. He writes on the Arctic Security Substack 66th Parallel North, Danish researcher Lucas Vaden, associate fellow with the Russia program at George Washington University. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to digital diplomacy strategist Marina Stamboliska, practitioner in residence at the French National Research Center, the CNRS's Center for Internet and Society. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And from Madrid, former director of policy planning at NATO, Fabrice Potier, CEO of political consultancy Rasmussen Global. Bonne année to you.
Bonne année. Nice to see you again.
On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. The day began with Donald Trump invoking the need for Greenland so that the U.S. can install a Golden Dome defense shield. Writing on Truth Social, the U.S. president stating that NATO would not be an effective force or deterrent, not even close, exclamation point. They know that, and so do I. NATO becomes far more formidable and effective with Greenland in the hands of the United States. Capital letters, the U.S. president's remarks there. First of all, Fabrice Potier, your reaction when you read that statement?
Well, I think I see two things here. One, the more Donald Trump is making a case for his own ownership of Greenland and undermining NATO, is that the result is, even if he doesn't do it, I think NATO will be left in a pretty bad shape politically. That's one thing. Second, I think his whole argument that the Greenland is not properly defended is actually artificial, because the U.S., under the current Danish-U.S. agreement, can deploy as many soldiers and as many capabilities as it wishes under the current agreement in Greenland. So I think he's just trying to rationalize something that is deeply personal, and as he said last week in a New York Times interview, deeply psychological for him.
And in the meantime, we're seeing in the past hours that Denmark's neighbors are rallying to Copenhagen's defense, doing it with, I guess it's symbolic, Lucas Vaden, but still, Norway sending two military personnel, to Greenland. I'll read you the statement that was emailed to the Reuters news agency, the foreign ministry, saying that this is to map out further cooperation between NATO allies. And this is on top of Sweden announcing that it is sending officers to Greenland. Your reaction?
Well, this is not just a symbolic move. The Europeans and European allies of Denmark at large have been trying to alleviate Trump's concerns over Greenland allegedly not being well protected enough from the point of view of Arctic security by dispatching troops, by sending additional military capabilities to the island, and by thereby hoping to show to the Americans that, yes, Europe is ready to shoulder its burden. Now, as Fabrice has rightly pointed out, part of the problem with that logic is that we do not actually know whether this form of attempt to entice the Americans actually addresses the root cause of the type of actions the White House has been taking. As Fabrice has mentioned, are security concerns genuine? Well, perhaps there are serious security concerns on the American side over missile defense in Greenland, space radars, the security of existing military sites. There are other real American interests, but on balance, from my point of view, of course, it would be much more cost efficient for the American side to try to lock in those gains and create that security by merely continuing cooperation with their very solid allies in Denmark and Greenland. So what we have to assume is that perhaps these European attempts, even though they are important and they are the only thing that European countries can do at the moment, may not actually lead to an improvement of the outcome, as in deter Donald Trump from making these kinds of statements.
Yeah, well, perhaps we can call up a map of showing Greenland. Denmark has 3 military installations there, and the U.S. there has the Pituffik, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, space base, 150 personnel in the north. It's far less than there was during the Cold War, but still, there is already a U.S. presence there. We saw last March the same U.S. vice president who's just held that closed-door meeting, of which so far nothing has filtered, with the top diplomats from Greenland and Denmark, visit that space-based group headquarters in Pituffik with his wife. What was your thoughts then?
Look, I think the decision by J.D. Vance at the time to not travel directly to Nuuk, but actually listen to the Danish reaction, which called that planned visit by his wife first and then by his wife and him a provocation. And in a sense, reroute the trip to the Pituffik space base directly was an attempt to dial down the tension. It was still interpreted as a provocation and as something that was uncalled for, uninvited on the Danish side. But yes, at the time, that's how I would have interpreted it. Now, the Pituffik space base that you mentioned is quite important to the United States. It's a really important communications hub for satellites, for monitoring missile launches around the world, and more importantly even, and this is something that I think J.D. Vance has been quite keen to speak about alongside Donald Trump, is that it's supposed to play a very important role in the missile defense system called the Golden Dome that the Trump administration is planning. So, yes, a provoking visit at the time. At the same time, it tried to dial down the tension slightly, and I think also points towards the actually existing American security interest and what the Americans can be expected to privilege in terms of their security.
Okay, so from what you're saying, Lucas, there's a mix, right? There's a mix of, on the one hand, genuine security concerns and defense strategies, and, as you put it, provocation. One question we've all been asking is why the trolling? It's not some parody site, but the official White House Instagram account that published an image earlier this week of the U.S. president and his number 2 looking out from the Resolute desk. There you see a map of Greenland outside the window. You know, I said in my introduction, Reina Stamoliska, if this is all just a bit of fun, or is it serious? What is it about? I mean, it's unusual, right? This is the White House's. And it doesn't get more institutional than that. This is their Instagram account.
Yeah, I will stray a little bit from my, quite level-headed colleagues, right? By saying that the institutions that we are used to seeing, working with, and so on, they don't exist anymore. And this is us Europeans still seeing our quote-unquote, many times ally, American ally, as an actor maintaining a very good faith-based institutional, setup and standing and grounding, which is not the case anymore. I mean, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from 64, 66 international organizations just a few days ago. I mean, there has been you cannot make it a more committed and coherent and repeated effort towards withdrawing from any multi-stakeholder international law-based process of, building a world together. Right? And so we saw what happened in Venezuela. So to me, what is happening in Greenland is a very clear risk of having, a ground invasion, which, and you're right, and Faris was pointing earlier about the NATO future, if we could argue about one, because the NATO treaty has never been thought about as one ally attacking the other, because there is Article 5 in the NATO treaty that says that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all NATO members.
Yeah, Greece and Turkey have had their differences in the past, but
Yeah.
but Greece and Turkey, they're not the United States in terms of dominance of the
Right.
alliance.
So you have a NATO member state attacking potentially another, which is also an EU member state, right? And you rightly pointed out earlier that there are Denmark's neighbors are coming around, but are other EU member states coming around in a show of force, of political will, about withstanding, this very aggressive American, stance on the sovereignty of different member states, be them NATO or EU member states.
So why the trolling?
So it's not trolling, it's their official position. I mean, to me, it's very simple. It's Occam's razor.
So it isn't to make jokes. They're
No,
serious.
when people tell you who they are and what they want, just listen to them. And we've repeatedly seen a very straightforward, sincere communication that, of course, shocks us. Well, less and less, because we've grown accustomed to it, unfortunately. But what we see is something that's very coherent, that's very congruent. We are the biggest military power in the world. We can do things, and, you don't like it? So what are you going to do about it?
All right, before I ask Fabrice Potier what might be happening in the high halls of NATO about this, let me just ask you, because not much has filtered from the 90 minutes that they were behind closed doors. We saw there was a little fist bump between the Greenlandic and the Danish foreign ministers coming out of it. Danish foreign minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, he's a political heavyweight. He's the former prime minister of Denmark. Can he have the same reading as Reina does, that actually a message like this one on Instagram matters? It is important?
Well, I think he'll be a little more. He'll have to be a little more constrained in his assessment, right? Because as the foreign minister of Denmark, he'll have to.
Is he up to the task of reading really what's an unprecedented situation?
If there's one Danish politician that is up to that task, it's probably Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who's famously direct in his approach to conflict and confrontation. So, very important, however, to point to the other person in the room, Vivian Motzfeldt, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greenland, who, in a sense, complements the Lars Løkke approach by being an incredibly intelligent and well-spoken advocate for the Greenlandic position, for Greenlandic dignity. As a team, I think they might have actually been able to bring across a couple of key messages effectively, I would hope. And I would assume that they would have absolutely focused on some of the things that we discussed, the security, the rare earths, the possibility for the United States to reach virtually all of the goals that they've outlined within the context of NATO and the existing alliance, in the hope that they would hear in return from Rubio and Vance that perhaps the obsession with territorial possession and acquiring Greenland as real estate on the part of the president is not quite as serious. But of course, that's the big elephant in the room. The one thing that
wait, it's not as serious. You're saying the obsession with expansion of imperialism, a sort of a manifest destiny that extends to the Arctic Circle?
No, I personally share Reina's assessment. Actually, that it's very serious, and I think that Donald Trump should be taken at his word when he speaks about his desire to get control, as in actual ownership of Greenland.
So, Fabrice Potier, we're going to spare you a clip of the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but I will paraphrase him, who on Tuesday stated that, look, we do our discussing behind closed doors, NATO's not dead yet. Are they thus, nonetheless, are they preparing obituaries in Brussels?
Well, first, I think what your previous question was about Twitter and trolling, I think there's something deeper here. This is an administration, especially a US president, who says and then does it. So he's got no filter. And I think we have to take him at his words. But it's even more powerful than that. And that's where the Instagram picture you showed, I think this is an administration that sees that what they say become action just by the fact of saying it. So I think this is something that how we have to read it. Then when it comes to NATO, I think NATO has been muted until recently. It took them a week to, in a way, get some act together, get some kind of forms of consensus. For the simple reason is that the main member of the alliance is actually the one that is threatening one member and, in fact, the entire alliance. So it was a very sticky situation to be in. And usually NATO is not comfortable with bilateral crises between its allies. However, I think NATO and the EU on the other side of town in Brussels, they both have to do much better coming together with a more credible package about how they are going to assure both the sustainability, the economic sustainability and development, but also the security of Greenland. And I think there's a long way we can go. Whether this will be enough to meet Donald Trump's concerns and I would say even obsession, I doubt. But I think at least we have got to try to put together a package showing we care about Arctic security and Greenland is a fundamental piece of that and we're willing to commit some real resources.
Yeah, but before what the EU can do, there's what the U.S. President will accept. Just listen to his tone. Donald Trump on Tuesday asked to react to Greenland's Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, stating in a press conference alongside his Danish counterpart, Mette Frederiksen, quote, "I choose Denmark."
Well, that's their problem. That's their problem. I disagree with him. I don't know who he is, don't know anything about him, but that's going to be a big problem for him.
That's going to be a big problem for him. Fabrice Potier, how would you interpret that remark?
Well, I think this is a typical threatening way that Donald Trump uses when he doesn't get his way. However, I think it shows in the limelight that you have a US president who has no shame about being basically a colonialist power, an imperialist power. And this is in a way why Greenland came up in this sense right after Venezuela, because you have Trump that is completely unfiltered, that is applying this new doctrine, Donroe doctrine, of basically securing what he considers his sphere of influence. So you have Donald Trump now applying Vladimir Putin's 20-year-old doctrine of the sphere of influence, applying it to the American hemisphere. And the question is whether Europe has what it takes to stop him and to show and draw a big, thick green, red line, because if not, you are going to see Europe squeezed between two major imperialist powers, both the United States on one hand and Russia on the other hand. And Europe has, I think, the very scary prospect of not so much having his own sphere of influence, but of becoming someone's sphere of influence.
Just to be very clear, Fabrice, you list there this expansionist temptation on the part of Donald Trump. Is that the number one reason, just to make the United States bigger? Or is it about the raw materials? Is it about common security in the Arctic? What is it? What is the top reason why he wants Greenland?
I think if it were critical raw materials or security, the current agreement between Copenhagen and Washington allows to do a lot of all of this. I think deep down is actually a very personal, emotional vision of how he wants to exercise US power. And I use the image of the bully in the schoolyard who looks at the schoolyard and sees some corners that are not completely controlled by the bully. And obviously bullies like to control. And he decided Greenland is one of his corners and he wants to own this. So I think it's a deeply personal and I would say emotional issue. Therefore, the answer to basically the Greenlandic Prime Minister, who is the elected representative of the people of Greenland, and his complete disregard for these people and the elected representative.
All right. It's interesting to see what are the possible motivations for Trump himself and those that surround him. Note his choice of ambassador to Denmark. introducing billionaire entrepreneur Ken Howery, who in a previous life was a co-founder of PayPal alongside the likes of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, the boss of data analytics giant Palantir. Tech titans love the concept of Greenland, writes Edward Luce in the Financial Times. He says Trump's libertarian friends have been eyeing it for some time. Thiel, who wants to set up a crypto-empowered network states on undeveloped territories, has invested in a company called Praxis, a startup that aims to do just that, and which has scouted Greenland. Trump's ambassador to Denmark, Ken Howery, was a co-founder with Thiel and Elon Musk of PayPal. Silicon Valley is awash with billionaires invested in one kind of network venture or another. Greenland is high on most lists. Unlike Mars, occupying Greenland is doable. On its website, Praxis touts itself as the first digital nation. There's even a link there where you can click to join the, quote, thousands of committed people from dozens of countries who've built technology companies worth more than $1 trillion. The courageous are joining us on this quest, end quote. In an article last spring, Praxis co-founder Dryden Brown told the Reuters news agency other companies have approached him about helping to establish a Greenland city. Brown flew to Greenland last year in 2024. He advocates for building a city there, in part because its harsh environment could provide a test site for colonizing Mars, one of Musk's highest ambitions. Is this some kind of pet project, Reina Stambulia? Or again, is this like a serious business venture?
It's a serious business venture. Look.
This isn't like an escape game? This is
No, I mean, it could be, right? But we need to be very clear about something, which is we Europeans do not see clearly enough the mindset or the world vision that those Silicon Valley moguls have. It's very distant from us. Here, because this is politics, right? How do we here in Europe, people from political science backgrounds and so on, how do we understand politics? It's something that is done through institutions. We vote for representatives. They do legislation, the usual things. How Silicon Valley views politics has nothing to do with this, right? It views politics as something that is mediated through technology, right? So when you kind of shift your view to adopt this one, you start seeing that those approaches, those perceptions, what it dictates, what the consequences of that vision are extremely distinctly, profoundly different from the way we, as Europeans, and so on, view politics and social reactions.
So they don't think about citizens, they think about tech. Donald Trump likes billionaires, and these billionaires from Silicon Valley, they see Greenland as a place to colonize for their experiments then.
That's one way of looking at it. But when you have technology, when you have tools, the citizens don't use tools, users use tools. So this changes the way that you as an individual participate in public life, in a world.
Are you suggesting they don't care about customer service?
Well, that's a user perspective, not a citizen perspective. But that's what I'm saying. It's a very different view from the way that we function, the way we operate, and the way we see what a society is, right? So when you get to a place where you could build a city that has a minimal government institutional interference in affairs.
Yeah, they're basically talking about building a private city.
Yes, because to them, and that's the Silicon Valley way, to them, people who have built successful companies are the most skillful, are the best people to run a group of other people. Because, in a group of other people, it's dysfunctional because not all of them are the smartest, not all of them are the most successful. So they should better just leave it to those who demonstratively, being billionaires, have succeeded.
Right.
So, the state is dysfunctional. That's what they have been saying for Peter Thiel for even before I was going to school.
Right.
So, and he's 0 to 1. So he's the most structured one.
So, okay, so let me ask you, Lucas Vaden, we talked about Donald Trump liking, for legacy's sake, to expand the United States, manifest destiny of America, taking over its sphere of influence. Are these people whispering in his ear? Are they the ones suggesting Greenland? Where does this Greenland concept come from?
Well, there are some of the folks currently whispering in his ear, right? And I think what Rainer just...
Does he listen to them, or is it just coming from his own head?
Well, does Donald Trump listen to anybody but himself? I'm not entirely sure. What Rainer just outlined is actually really important because it sort of adds another piece of contradiction to the inexplicable mess that is current US Greenland policy. On the one hand, you have folks like Peter Thiel and tech billionaires advocating to establish libertarian utopian cities on that island that are unshackled from any state control. On the other hand, you have a president who is deeply inspired by the great imperial presidents of the US past and who would like to expand US territory and expand the US state to new territories for the sake of enlarging what the US looks like on the map. So essentially a project that is one from 200 years ago. You have different groups that support these ideational strands, and they all have access to the president. Now, which group comes out of top in terms of shaping the actual output of Donald Trump on this question on any given day depends on factors that probably have a lot to do with the president's erratic personality and whoever gains access to him in any given moment. But is it possible for all of these ideational strands to impact him at the same time? Yes. Does the president see a contradiction? Perhaps. But does he know how to play with and strategically exploit chaos and contradiction? Most certainly. I would not over-intellectualize the question and try to pin down one specific strand or one specific group that really shapes US Greenland policy at the moment. They all matter. They matter in different ways. They are all used for quasi-propaganda purposes. But which one exactly has put Donald Trump onto this path of saying that nothing less than direct territorial control of Greenland will suffice for him? We don't know.
Fabrice Potier, the way you heard Rainer Stamboliska describe it, these are no friends of democracy, these tech titans, the way they in their concept for technocratic states of a new sort. How should, if you're the foreign minister or the prime minister of a European nation, view the United States now?
Well, I think we should not mix certain clans and groups with Donald Trump and Donald Trump's vision, or I would say, again, obsession. You do have Peter Thiel and many big tech players and oligarchs who are actually pushing certain aspects of the US administration's policy, but I think they are sometimes following. And I think on Greenland, this is really something Trump had in mind already in his first mandate, you might remember. And now he's obviously in his second mandate. He came back, I would say, with a vengeance. He feels completely unchecked, both by US checks and balance, but also by foreign powers. And I think then you have the tech boss who are actually seeing opportunities and pushing their agenda. And J.D. Vance is obviously quite close to them because of his background. So, but I will not confuse the tech boss with what Trump is trying to achieve in Greenland, which is, I think, his need to own something, his need to feel safe in his own neighborhood. And this is why he's toppled Maduro in Venezuela. This is why he might do more of this in Latin America or Central America. And this is why now he's turning his gaze towards Greenland. So I think they're obviously allies and they're working together between the tech giants and Donald Trump. But I don't think it's the same policy and the same reasons.
There is a start of a pushback among legislators on Capitol Hill in Washington, Fabrice. Those who support the NATO, at least two Republican senators who said they won't approve any more appointments if this continues. But how strong is their resolve?
Well, we saw the GOP becoming completely Trumpized over the past few years, which was not the case during Trump's first mandate, where the Grand Old Party, the Republican Party, was still holding a kind of mainstream approach to foreign policy and to many domestic policy political priorities. That's no longer the case. So I think we can fear and expect possibly the worst. There are some obviously dissenting voices, but as you know, there are also the midterm elections that are set for the fall of this year. And this also means that many of the members of Congress will have to have the blessing of Donald Trump to have a chance of running again or even raising funds. So I think this is going to be a tough one, but there's no surprise that the Danish and Greenlandic representatives have lobbied Congress in order to actually win the Republicans and others over to their cause.
Rina Stambuliska, lobby Capitol Hill.
Look, just a few thoughts on this, because I still feel we are very comfortable with our view of the world as a place where level-headed people interact in good faith towards finding a consensus that benefits everyone. We still kind of fall back to this. And unfortunately, and I'm sorry to be like the party pooper here, this is not the case of the current US administration. And in a stark contrast to the first Trump administration, we have a more than 1,000-page thick Project 2025. It's not people who found themselves in the White House and, so what could we do? No, there is a clear, in this case, policy is the right word. There is a plan that is outlined for everyone to see. I mean, I'm not kind of, talking here about something very confidential. This is there for everyone to see. And this whole dismantling of institutions, what it creates, and that's also why we are struggling and sometimes recurring to things that I'm very cautious about, that are the psychological state of another person. I'm not a qualified psychologist. I can't say anything. But what we are seeing is a mudding of the responsibility waters. I mean, the US is a complicated place. It's a federal state. There is state level stuff. It's always been a nightmare to figure out what institution you need to talk to. But you still could figure out the chain of command, who is responsible for what and whatever. Today, and the question that you asked earlier about the actual influence on power and decision-making of tech bros and others, that's the question, and to which we still don't have an answer, and I'm not sure we will have an answer one day, at least in the next 2-3 years. It's because the way that we are used to institutions working is not the way they work anymore.
All right, so throw out the old playbook. Since we've been on air in the last 2 hours, first Sweden, then Norway, Germany's largest selling tabloid newspaper, Bild, is reporting now that Germany will send soldiers to Greenland this week. Lucas Vaden, your reaction to this breaking news?
Yeah, not a surprise.
Not a surprise?
Not a surprise at all. No, I think these talks have been going on between the Danish government and European partners for quite some time. A German frigate and a French frigate and various delegations of both the Bundeswehr, the German army, and the French Ministry of Defense have visited Greenland over the past couple of months. I think I've outlined the rationale for this earlier. The idea is to try and signal to the Americans that Europe is committed to do more to protect Greenland and to shoulder part of the burden for Arctic security. Upon the invitation of Denmark and with the consent of Greenland, that may possibly also include ground troops. I would, however, question whether the primary purpose of sending those troops to Greenland from the German point of view would be to in any way deter the United States militarily. I don't think that will be the primary purpose.
Well, we had this statement, and I guess Lars Klingbeil, the Vice Chancellor, has been listening to Rina Stambuliska, because he stated earlier this Wednesday that the transatlantic relationship, as we have known it, is currently disintegrating. This is Germany, which is home to all those U.S. military bases, which buys all those F-35 aircrafts. This is the Vice Chancellor, the Finance Minister of Germany saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the second Trump administration has engendered a paradigm shift in all of the most staunchly transatlantic countries in Europe. That includes Germany on the one hand, but also, of course, very importantly, Denmark itself and the entirety of Scandinavia. And we cannot forget the degree to which Denmark has historically been an incredibly pro-American country that has supported United States foreign policy in most iterations, fiercely committed to NATO. So I think this psychological shift away from thinking of NATO as something that is guaranteed. Article 5 is something that you can unqualifiedly rely on the Americans always being our friends. That is currently happening in virtually all European capitals. Part of the consequence of that is that, of course, our thinking about Ukraine is changing and about what to do over Ukraine. And I think there, especially in the case of Germany, it's important to highlight that, yes, the Germans, as well as the Scandinavians, would like to push back over Greenland, would like to push back against the United States over Greenland, but they also always, in the back of their minds, are thinking about the situation in Ukraine and are thinking about the necessity of keeping the United States involved in the defense efforts around the Ukraine, which from the point of view of these countries in particular would quickly disintegrate without US support. So it's a dilemma from the German point of view, the Scandinavian, the Danish point of view, and I think it's a dilemma that won't quickly be resolved.
Yeah, Fabrice Potier, Berlin is closer to the Ukrainian border than it is to Paris. So your thoughts on, how far the Germans can go?
I think I agree with the guest that I don't think this is about deterring the United States Army. I think it's about sending a signal of collective unity from the Europeans towards the United States, and in a way saying, if you do anything, the cost, the political, potentially economic, maybe even military cost will be much higher than you think. Of course, you can still prevail. We all know that the US has the capacity, the capabilities to actually take over Greenland in just potentially, I would say, even a few hours. However, I think this is it's about signaling the consequences of any possible political or military annexation. And that's where you have this unity. And I do agree with the previous guest that this is a new age, a new era for Europe, where they have to think about the defense of Europe without the United States. We have a European defense, but that European defense is not capable of defending our own continent. And I think now we really have to focus our spending and our planning, our military planning, and our technology towards our capacity to defend our own continent.
All right, speaking of messaging, France, through its foreign minister, confirming that it is opening a consulate in Greenland with an estimated grand total of 6 French nationals on the whole of the island. Jean-Noël Barrot telling RTL Radio, yes, it's to show support for the Kingdom of Denmark.
Attacking another NATO member would make no sense. It would even be contrary to the interests of the United States. And I'm hearing more and more voices in the US saying this, so this blackmail must obviously stop. The first day of 2026 clearly demonstrated it is now the law, the strongest that governs relations between nations.
Fabrice Potier used the word blackmail there. Is it? Are you saying finally, or are you saying watch out? Watch how you handle the Americans.
Well, I think this is how Donald Trump negotiates. He exerts huge pressure and power, and will blackmail you to get what he wants. And I think it's really an irony of history that now we have Europe has to put some tripwires not only against Russia, but potentially against the United States. So we are deploying symbolic number of forces and diplomats as a way to say the moment you move in Greenland, there will be a collective reaction of different kind. And I think nobody could have imagined such an approach even a few months ago.
Reina Stamolisia?
Yeah, it's... I want to kind of nuance things in the sense that it's big time we stopped with the symbolics and started walking the talk.
So what, you don't like the consulate opening in Greenland?
I don't care. I mean, it's a symbol, But the thing is that when you're faced with someone who has, and I'm trying to behave here, a profound disrespect, contempt of symbols, he wants great TV. I mean, how do you address someone like this with, oh, we're opening a consulate? And he's like, whatever that is. You know, so and then, okay, you're opening a consulate. You're putting two people to protect or to show a show of solidarity, blah, blah, blah. And then he comes. Actual people with actual weapons that shoot and kill are descending. What do? You stand before your consulate and, hey, but it's a good symbol of, you know, friendship and blah, blah, blah. Like, so what do we do in 3 months, in 6 months, when things will get serious? Because once again, we have been hearing J.D. Vance last year at the Munich Security Conference. In December of last year, like just a few weeks ago, we had the U.S. National Security Strategy, which is extremely explicit about steering the Europe towards a specific political organization and ideological organization. So how long are we going to go with symbols?
All right, maybe it's not symbols. I don't know. Lucas Waden Bild going further, saying that this would be a reconnaissance deployment. They're quoting. So I don't know. It's more than just one or two officers. Nonetheless, what do Danes think of the messaging from the rest of Europe, and you know, how do they see this moment? Again, Denmark is also one of those countries that owns those connected F-35 jets, where the U.S. can turn off the software.
Well, I think I'll answer in the words of Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who only last week spoke of her country's continued reliance on the United States as its most important ally and chief security provider. In the larger political context, I mean, we're speaking about, obviously, it's impossible for any European country to deter the United States militarily over anything. But in the political context, in the context of enticement of Trump, it is, of course, extremely important for Denmark to be able to rally European countries behind it and show to the Americans that it is not putting forward these arguments all by itself. There was a statement coming out of the Elysee on the 6th of January that was signed by most important heads of state in Europe. I know that in Copenhagen, this is read as brilliant support statement.
Lucas Waden, I want to thank Reina Stambuliska and Fabrice Potier. We're going to cross live and listen in to the foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland as they address the press.